Shout with joy to God all the earth.
Sing to the glory of his name.
Offer him glory and praise.
Sing to the glory of his
Sing
name.
to the
Sing to the
glory.
glory of his name.
Sing to the
Sing to the glory of his name.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Devoratorium. My name is Darnay DeVore, and I'm going to be your host. On today's episode, we'll be discussing Father Abraham. Father Abraham. Now, who is that? I'm sure you've heard that name before, Abraham. When I was a kid, I didn't realize how important Abraham actually was. Not only is he important to the scriptures, but he's important for the salvation of all mankind. You remember that song? If you were in church growing up like I was, it was called Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. What did that mean? When I was a kid, I thought Abraham was just some old guy who just kept having a lot of kids physically with his wife. We're going to look into the scriptures in this 3-part series, and we're going to choose three focus points of Abraham. By the time we're done with this, if you already know who Abraham is, this will just be a refresher. If you don't know who he is, that's my goal, is I want you to know who Abraham is and how your salvation ties in to his faith. There's going to be 3 aspects. Each video will have a focus of its own. Video number 1, who was Abraham? That's our first one today. Our second video will be, how was Abraham saved? That is, how was he considered righteous in God's sight? And number 3, how his promise, the promise of Abraham, affects all of us today, you and me. So in today's video, part 1, who was Abraham? Let's start with his name, Abraham. Abraham's original name was Abram. God himself changed Abraham's name to Abraham, changed Abram's name to Abraham when God blessed him to become the father of many nations. You'll see that original name in Genesis 11 and 26, and you'll see his new name once God changed it in Genesis 17 and verse 5. Next, his ancestral family line. Where did Abraham come from? If you remember the story of Noah's Ark, Noah was saved on the ark along with his wife and his 3 sons. The 3 sons were named Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Abraham was from the family line of Shem, okay? And you'll see that in Genesis 11, 10 through 26. Next point, God's call. Okay, God called Abraham to leave his country and to leave his people, leave them all behind, and to take his family to the promised land that God would show him. But that was not the end of God's promise to Abraham. God also promised to make Abraham into a great nation, which became Israel, and that every nation, some of your translations may say family, every family, but every family or every nation on earth will be blessed through Abraham. You'll find that in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 through 4. The next point is Abraham's heart. What kind of heart did Abraham have? Abraham and his family were traveling along with Abraham's nephew Lot and his family. As their families grew bigger and bigger, the resources they had to draw from became smaller and smaller. For example, when they would come upon a riverbed and they wanted to allow their animals to drink, they wanted to drink themselves and bathe, and usually around riverbeds there were vegetation, fruits, things like that they can pick and eat. Well, as their families grew bigger and bigger, both families could not equally eat and drink all they wanted. Okay, resources grew a little slim. That created conflict between the 2 families. This is my apple tree for me and my family. You take the other one over there. Well, there is none. There's no apple tree over there. We want this one. And conflict just kept going and going. Abraham just said, no, we're not going to fight. We're family after all. So what Abraham did was he took Lot and said, look here, look amongst this plain, this big giant where we're headed. Look in this direction. Which way do you and your family want to go? Well, Lot chose the direction that had the most vegetation, that was watered the most. And Abraham said, okay, whichever way you choose, I'll go the other way. And that's the direction that Lot chose. Lot chose the best direction. Abraham allowed it because his heart was so full of love for his family, number one. But number two, Abraham knew even then, no matter what direction we decide to go, God's going to be with us. So it's okay, nephew, wherever you want to go, we'll go the other way. You want the best land, you want the best vegetation, the most watered areas to travel, you knock yourself out. You knock yourself out. Enjoy. I love you. Safe journeys. Okay? That's the heart of Abraham, giving family the best and him taking the rest. Here's another point I had no idea of when I was growing up. Did you know Abraham was also a warrior and a general? Yeah, military warrior. This dude was tough. I thought Abraham was just some old guy with a long flowing robe with the staff and a long beard that just, he was a great, nice guy. But a warrior? No, this went right over my head. But here's the story. Abraham's nephew, Lot, decided to live in the city of Sodom. Sodom eventually fell to some foreign conquerors. What happened was that these four kings took over 5 other kingdoms. Within those 5 other kingdoms was the city of Sodom where Lot lived. These 4 kingdoms took Lot captive and took all his stuff. They conquered the kingdoms that Lot lived in, took him and his family and all his stuff. You know what Abraham did? Uncle Abraham? Abraham gathered a little over 300 men. That's it. A little over 300 men and conquered all 4 of the enemy kingdoms and rescued Lot and his family and got all his stuff back. You'll see that in Genesis chapter 14, 1 through 16. It's an amazing story. Check it out. How about Abraham's failure? I don't want anyone to ever think that any character in the Bible, except for Jesus himself, is perfect, because no one is. Even Abraham endured failures. Okay? Here's just one. Years had passed after Abraham and his wife were promised a son by God himself. God told him, you're going to have a son. And they were already old. Sarah was barren and could not have kids. She had known that all of her life. Okay? But here comes God saying, you two are going to have a son. So years had passed since God even made that promise. Abraham and Sarah began to lose faith and decided to take matters into their own hands. Rather than Abraham and his wife having a son, they decided that Abraham and their servant Hagar should have the son. And you'll find that story in Genesis chapter 16, 1 through 4. Abraham's test of faith. This is the big one. This is the one that's probably the most contentious story that a lot of critics harp on when it comes to the Bible narrative. Why would this happen? Why should this happen? Here's what happened. Even after all the things that Abraham and God had been through, God decided to test Abraham's faith. The same son that God promised that Abraham and Sarah were going to have together, God ordered Abraham to sacrifice back to him. Yeah. You'll see that in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1 through 19. Now, there's a couple of things I want to touch on in just this part, Abraham's test of faith. First of all, keep in mind, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son to God, not just kill him. God could have just killed Abraham's son, Isaac, himself. Or Abraham could have snuck up behind Isaac and slit his throat to kill him. If that was the only point here, was to kill Isaac. That was not the point. The point was to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. All right? When you sacrifice something, you're offering it to whatever deity or whatever God that you are worshiping. And in this case, Abraham worshiping the one true God. This is indeed a sacrifice. So keep that in mind. This is sacrifice, not just straight murder. All right. Even though Isaac would have been murdered or killed in this sacrifice, it is an actual sacrifice. It is Abraham giving something to God that God gave to him to begin with. Does that make sense? In other words, God is telling Abraham, I gave you your son. Give him back to me. It begs the question, do you worship the Creator more than you do the creation? Do you love the Creator more than you love the creation? It doesn't matter what it is. It could be you, it could be me, it could be our children, it could be our grandchildren, it could be our cars, our homes, our wives, our husbands, whomever they may be, whatever it may be. It's the creation. It is not the Creator. Question is on all of us now. Do we love the Creator more than we love the creation? That's a pretty big question that a lot of us may find difficult to actually answer, especially when we're face to face with God himself. The second thing I want to put on your mind is that God is the author of life. Life came from him. He created the stars, the sun, the moon, the earth, the universe. He created everything you see and everything you don't see. The very air you're breathing, God created that and the process by which we breathe it. When I say he's the author of life, there is no life except for what he has created and what he sustains with his own power. Okay? He's got power over life and death. At this point, I can rest assured that Abraham was confident enough in God to know that even if he were to sacrifice his own child, his very own Isaac, to God, that God, having power over life and death, could give him right back to Abraham. Okay, he can give him right back. Death is not the same for God as it is for you and me. We don't have power over death. God has ultimate power over everything. So death does not hold any final consequences when we're talking about God. So if God tells you, give this to me, sacrifice this to me, no matter how much it may tear us apart inside, this is the Lord of the universe. He can take the life of the person you're trying to protect of his own volition. But he doesn't do that. He wants to test your faith. Do you trust me, Abraham? Do you really believe in me, Abraham? Do you love me, Abraham? Am I the center of your heart, Abraham? Now, take out the name Abraham and put your name in there. Do you love God? Do you worship him? Do you obey him? All right. Do you believe in him? Do you have faith in him that whatever you lose, he can return to you 100-fold, or whatever you lose in his great infinite wisdom, he knows you didn't need anyway. Whatever it may be, that's a question we all need to look at when we're considering this scenario of Abraham's test of faith. By the way, Abraham passed that test of faith. Thank goodness, because, well, we'll see in video 3. But to finish up this video, Abraham himself finally died at 175 years old. That is a long, great life. You'll find that in Genesis chapter 25, verse 7 through 8. Can you imagine living 175 years? How many generations of children that you would see? Your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren, and still be healthy enough to actually see them physically, to actually touch them, to hold them. That it would just be amazing. So if you already knew all these details about Abraham's life, great, you're a rock star. If you did not know, that's fine. Here they are. Read these stories. Check out these scriptures. They are so important as to who Abraham was, who his character was. As we move along in our video series, you'll get to understand how Abraham and his life affects us and our lives, which makes that song make all the more sense. Father Abraham had many sons. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Stay tuned for the next video.